Emotional dependency doesn't begin when someone enters our life. It starts much earlier, at the moment when we learn far too soon that being alone hurts more than being in bad company. What many people call intense love is actually fear. Fear of losing, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough. Emotional dependency is exactly that. When the other person stops being a choice and becomes a psychological necessity in order to keep existing emotionally. Those who live with emotional dependency don't love to share, they love to survive. The other person starts to function as an internal regulator. It's the other who soothes, who validates, who gives meaning, who sustains self-esteem. Without this presence, an emptiness arises that isn't just simple sadness. It's deep anguish, a sense of abandonment, internal disarray. That's why emotional dependency doesn't only reveal itself in major emotional tragedies. It shows up in everyday life, in repeated, silent, and often normalized behaviors. One of the most common examples is the constant threat of leaving. The person says they're going to leave home, that they're going to end the relationship, that they can't take this situation anymore, but they never actually go. They repeat this many times over the years, not because they're lying or doing it consciously, but because the threat works as a desperate attempt to keep the bond alive. To actually leave would mean facing the emptiness, the loneliness, and one's own identity outside of that relationship. And that is more frightening than continuing to suffer. Another extremely common sign is the difficulty in accepting no. For the emotional dependent, no doesn't sound like a healthy boundary. It sounds like rejection. A simple, "not now, I can't, or I don't want to," can trigger intense reactions such as deep sadness, crying fits, disproportionate anger, emotional blackmail, or even a punishing silence. And this happens because internally, no is interpreted as abandonment. The other person stops being someone with their own desires and starts being seen as a threat to emotional stability. Emotional dependence also reveals itself in a real difficulty with emotional learning. Many people repeat exactly the same mistakes in different relationships with different people, but following the same script. The characters change, but the story is always the same. Broken promises, unrealistic expectations, attempts to save the other person, constant frustrations. Learning doesn't take hold because the fear of losing is greater than the ability to sustain change. It's because the person even understands it rationally but can't apply it emotionally. In daily life, this looks like when someone repeatedly believes that this time it will be different, even without any concrete evidence, or when they take responsibility for the other person's emotions, believing that if they do everything right, the relationship will finally work. The fantasy arises that love, care, and patience will transform the other person. In psychoanalysis, this reveals an unconscious attempt to repair old wounds within a current relationship. Another classic example is the difficulty in being alone. It's not about a preference for company, but a real inability to stay with oneself. Silence is uncomfortable, solitude is distressing, and free time generates anxiety. Many people jump from one relationship to another or maintain unsatisfying connections just to avoid facing their own company. Being alone triggers old feelings of abandonment, rejection, and helplessness that were never worked through. Emotional dependence also manifests itself in the progressive erasure of one's identity. The person starts giving up opinions, tastes, friendships, projects, and even self-worth just to maintain the relationship. Phrases like, "whatever, however you want, the important thing is that you're okay," become constant. So the problem isn't in giving in, but in only knowing how to relate by giving in. Over time, the person no longer knows what they want, only what they need to do to avoid being abandoned. From a psychoanalytic perspective, emotional dependence is deeply connected to early bonding experiences. When a child grows up in an environment where affection is unstable, conditional, or unpredictable, they learn that love requires excessive effort, constant vigilance, and adaptation. They learn that, to be accepted, they need to please others. The psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott described this phenomenon when he spoke about the false self, a personality constructed not from authentic desire, but from the need to emotionally survive in one's environment. In adulthood, the emotionally dependent person often continues to live through this false self. Sigmund Freud had already warned that unhealthy bonds arise when the other person ceases to be a subject and becomes an object of psychic support. The other person is not someone with whom you share your life, but someone who serves to fill an internal void. Later on, Jacques Lacan deepened this idea when he spoke about the desire of the other. In emotional dependence, the unconscious question stops being "what do I desire?" and becomes "what do I need to be so that the other desires me?" At this point, the subject disappears and only the function remains. Philosophy, long before psychoanalysis, had already been warning about the dangers of relationships based on need. So much so that the Stoic Epictetus used to say that when someone is emotionally dependent on what they cannot control, they become a slave to it. Seneca, on the other hand, stated, "There is no possible freedom when emotional stability depends on another person." Nietzsche warned that relationships sustained by neediness do not produce love, but resentment, because one side always has to nullify itself so that the other can remain. That's why when a relationship ends or threatens to end, the pain feels unbearable. It's not just the loss of the other person, it's the loss of an identity built around that bond. The person doesn't just lose someone, they lose a role, a function, an emotional routine, a feeling. The breakup causes an internal collapse, because what used to sustain the self ceases to exist. It's not longing, it's psychological disorganization. Emotional dependence doesn't choose a gender, age, or type of relationship. It can exist in romantic relationships, family ties, friendships, and even at work. Whenever someone erases themselves to avoid losing, submits themselves to be accepted, or lives according to someone else's relationship, there is emotional dependence there. The first step to breaking this pattern isn't to impulsively end relationships, it's to see it. As long as the person believes they love too much, they don't realize they're abandoning themselves, they don't realize they've traded their own worth for the presence of the other. True change begins when a difficult but liberating question arises. At what point in my life did I learn that I needed someone else in order to exist? Emotional dependence is not weakness. It's an old strategy for psychic survival. But what once protected you, now imprisons you. To love is not to lose yourself, not to adapt until you disappear, not to merely survive emotionally. Love is the meeting of two whole people, not the desperation of someone who needs to be saved. And when this starts to become clear, something changes inside, because seeing is the first step toward freedom. If, while you were listening to this episode, something tightened in your chest, if a certain phrase echoed louder than it should have, maybe it's not a coincidence. Maybe it's your psyche asking for change. Emotional dependence can't be resolved by intellectual understanding alone. Understanding is important, but it's not enough, because emotional patterns don't dissolve through willpower. They need to be reorganized from within. That's why I developed the training program format Emotional Reset. This is not a motivational course, nor is it a collection of ready-made phrases. It's a structured therapeutic process designed to help you identify where your emotional system got stuck, which bonds disconnected you from yourself, and how to rebuild, step by step, a healthy relationship with yourself and with others. Format: Emotional Reset was created for those who are tired of just emotionally surviving, for those who realize they've adapted too much, given in too much, lost themselves too much, and now want to come back to themselves. Throughout the training, you are guided to understand your attachment patterns, recognize emotional dependencies, restore internal boundaries, and recover what was fragmented through your emotional experiences.